In the world of organized crime, there are some criminals who get caught, some criminals who get killed, and some criminals who just disappear. There's no body or confession, no confirmed sightings, just a name frozen in time. In the early 1970s, federal agents believed they were closing in on one of the most powerful drug traffickers in American history. A man who built a nationwide drug empire and made tens of millions of dollars. And when they finally caught up with him, they arrested him, they charged him, and they set a court date. When he was supposed to be facing justice, he just disappeared. This is the interesting true story of Frank Matthews, a man that overcame poverty, racial inequality, and built an empire that rivaled the Mafia. Then, he just walked away from everything. Frank Matthews wasn't born into power. He was born in 1944 in Durham, North Carolina, into poverty and instability. When he was just 4 years old, his mother died, and he was raised by relatives who were themselves struggling to keep their lives together. So from an early age, he learned one thing. If you want anything in this world, you have to take it. School never really mattered much to him. Neither did authority, really. By his early teens, he was already stealing, fighting, running with older kids who taught him how the street economy really worked. At 14 years old, Frank landed in juvenile detention for a violent robbery attempt. Now, for most kids, this would be a warning. For Frank, it was training, because when he got out, he didn't slow down. He leveled up. Eventually, Frank left North Carolina and headed north. Like many young men in the 1960s, he was chasing opportunity, and that brought him to Brooklyn, specifically Bedford-Stuyvesant, a neighborhood that was overflowing with ambition, desperation, and underground money. On the surface, Frank lived a quiet life. He worked as a barber, a trade that he had already done in Philadelphia and back home in North Carolina. He smiled and he listened when people talked, but behind the scenes, he was studying something far more important: how money moved. Things, small loans and street gambling, numbers running. And he realized something that other people didn't. So most people were focused on selling drugs, but he realized the money was in the distribution. More importantly, no one in his position was being allowed to the top. See, the heroin trade in America at the time was being dominated by the Italian Mafia. And if you weren't connected, you were cut out. So Frank did something bold. He went directly to the families. Frank Matthews approached major Mafia families in New York, asking if he could just buy heroin from their supply. They turned him down. Not because he wasn't capable, but because he just wasn't in the Mafia. He wasn't part of the family. And for many people, that had been the end of the story. But for Frank Matthews, it was just the beginning. If they wouldn't sell to him, he'd just go around them. Through connections that he had made in Harlem, Frank was introduced to international suppliers, men who had access to cocaine and heroin that was coming directly from South America. And in that moment, everything changed. Frank wasn't just selling drugs, he built a system. Instead of working under families, instead of answering to bosses, Frank became the middleman. He started supplying to dealers in dozens of cities from the East Coast stretching into the Midwest. Entire organizations depended on him. And he did something that was unheard of at the time. He sold cocaine and heroin. Not one or the other, but both. By the early 1970s, he was moving staggering amounts of narcotics across 21 states. Federal agents later admitted something chilling. Frank Matthews wasn't just another dealer. He was one of the largest drug traffickers in the history of the United States. Frank didn't hide his success. He bought a mansion in Staten Island in a neighborhood that was filled with Mafia royalty, men who at one point in time had refused to work with him. He drove expensive cars, wore tailored suits, gambled openly in Las Vegas. Frank Matthews lived the life of a man who believed he was untouchable. And for a while, he was. An operation that large couldn't stay invisible forever. By 1972, federal agencies were already building a case against him. Wiretaps, informants, financial records. But they knew they couldn't get Frank on drug charges alone, so they did what they did with Al Capone. They went after his money. In Las Vegas in 1973, Frank Matthews was arrested on drug conspiracy and tax evasion charges. The judge set the bail at $5 million. It was one of the biggest ever at the time. Then something odd happened. The bail was lowered from $5 million to $325,000. So Matthews posted bail and he walked free. He left behind his mansion, his family, his entire organization, and then just nothing. No phone calls or bank activity were detected. There were no confirmed sightings. For the first time in US history, a drug kingpin of that magnitude just walked away from it all. Some people believe that he disappeared overseas, living a quiet life under a new name. Some people believe that the Mafia had offed him because he disrupted their control over the drug trade in North America. Most of the rumors seem to think that he didn't live for very long after he disappeared, but there's one thing that we can say for sure. No body has ever been found, no grave, no proof of his existence in the decades of investigation after the events that occurred in the 1970s. Frank Matthews has never been located. Frank Matthews broke every rule. He built an empire without the Mafia. He out-earned men who had run crime families for decades, and when the system finally caught up to him, he slipped through its fingers. And that's what makes this story so unforgettable. Because remember, he was born in 1944, so he would be in his early 80s now. 82 in 2026. So he could still be out there. Somewhere. If you would like to see more interesting true stories like this, please like, subscribe, and hit the notification button for a new episode weekly. And what do you think? Did Frank Matthews live a life of leisure? Is he still out there somewhere? Or did he come to an untimely death? Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next Interesting True Stories.